So you want to play Last Epoch and you don't know where to start or how anything works. No problem, because I am going to show you everything you need to know to get started and make your own build that works, feels powerful, and is fun to play. Every class in Last Epoch has a lot of build diversity with masteries, and choosing a mastery, which happens around level 20, could be pretty daunting considering it is permanent. But it is important to know that some masteries just straight up perform better than others. For example, a druid or a paladin has a lot more builds that easily reach the endgame, whereas choosing a shaman or a spellblade requires more knowledge of the game and it would leave you with fewer build choices. That being said, any build you make can master the endgame, it just takes more time and investment into your character. After choosing a class, let's bring up the passive skill tree by pressing P and take a look at the masteries on the left. You will find that each mastery has its own passive bonuses. This is a good hint at the type of builds that mastery is going to support. For example, the Void Knight clearly leans into using melee void damage, whereas on the other hand, a paladin is the better choice for elemental and physical damage builds. Even after choosing a mastery, you can put points into other masteries. Just know you are locked out of any passives on the right half of the passive tree, separated by the big chain in the middle. For most builds at higher level, it's actually a really good idea to grab passives in other masteries, like this one in Void Knight. Even though I'm a paladin, I get a huge boost in defensives here with health, void, and physical resistance, so don't be afraid to dip into other mastery passives. Now for your skills and specs. I won't go into crazy detail here because this video would be way too long and much harder to digest, but once you understand the basics, it's pretty straightforward. Some important things to note are that each skill has a little icon to the right of it, showing which damage types are available for that skill. For example, Warpath is a physical skill inherently, but it can be converted to a fire or even a void skill. Every skill has scaling tags. What this means is any one of these tags is going to increase the power of that skill. If we take a look at Javelin here, you can see that it scales with physical, throwing attack, strength, and dexterity. So any one of these stats on passives or items will increase the damage. But some skills are sneaky. If you look closely, added throwing damage applies at 180% effectiveness. This means throwing damage will scale better than the scaling tags listed at the bottom. You can even see the same with Shield Bash. 1.5% more damage per 1% block chance. So just keep your eye out when you're planning a build. Pressing Alt when you mouse over a skill will also provide some very useful information on the scaling of that skill as well. Specializations are what you see at the top of the page. You can choose 5 skills to specialize in, completely altering the skill and defining your build. These will level up with your character as you gain EXP up to a maximum of 20, which can be increased further with increases to your skills on your items. So you found the skill you want to specialize in, you open it up, and whoa. Okay, to make things easy, start by looking at the big hexagon-shaped nodes. These are usually what are going to alter your skill the most. Let's take a look at Smite here. I don't really want to deal fire damage, so this won't work. This would make it a movement skill, but I already have one in my build, so no thanks. Okay, this node adds a ton of damage, and Order of Lagon up at the top right converts it to lightning. Perfect. I can do a high damage Smite build focused on lightning. Now we can take a look at the smaller circle nodes that benefit that playstyle you're going for. And most times, it really is that simple. You don't need to overthink it. Stats, the focal point of any ARPG. There's stats on your gear, there's stats on your skills, on your idols, which I will cover later in the video. You get the point. So let's start with doing damage. You want to stick to 1 or 2 damage types at most. Going past that makes it really hard to scale your damage. Then you need to find a balance between flat damage and percentage damage. So if you get a lot of flat damage on your weapon, like this unique, the Last Laugh, with plus 64 physical damage, you would increase your damage a lot higher if you paired this weapon with a ring that had 40% physical damage as opposed to plus 15 physical damage. Just make sure you have a good balance of flat damage increases and percent damage increases. Don't just focus on one or the other. Attack speed and crit can also be very useful, but keep in mind when doing a crit style build, you need to heavily invest into crit chance and multiplier for it to be effective. Another important tip is to identify what build you are going for. Do you want big juicy hits? Go with a critical strike build. Want to do damage over time? Stack damage over time multipliers. Try not to go hybrid, as this more or less turns out to be less effective than focusing on one type of damage. Now you might say, okay, I'm doing great damage, but man, why does my character just keep dying? Well, you need to max out your resistances, and the cap is 75%. But it's not a bad idea to go over the cap, because some enemies will penetrate your resistances. This is the first priority. Then you want to look at your health. Investing into your max health is important. If you get hit by a fire attack that does 2000 damage, and you have 75% fire resistance and 450 health, 500 of that damage is still getting through and you are going to get one shot. So make sure you get increases to health and add a lot of health regeneration or lifesteal to keep feeding health into your health pool. You can even build into Ward, which is a shield over top of your health pool and decays over time. Ward retention is a stat that will help make the Ward shield decay much slower, but most classes won't really use Ward unless you are playing an Acolyte or a Mage where it can be really good. Those are your primary defenses. This is the important part. To make your character very tanky, you need to layer your defenses. What do I mean by that? Well, you have block chance, for instance, which gives you a chance to block damage, and the amount you block is increased with block effectiveness. So you can see here, if I block an attack, it reduces the damage by 38%, which is fantastic. But why? Because that is an extra layer of protection after my resistances have already reduced the damage. If someone throws, and I mean whips, a cookie at your face, even half of a cookie, it would probably hurt. But what if by the time the cookie gets to your face, it's just crumbs? Do you see what I mean? Another great defensive is armor. It's perfect for straight up reducing damage from a direct physical hit. But in Last Epoch, 70% of your armor is also used to reduce non-physical direct damage. This does not affect damage over time at all though. Endurance, dodge, stun avoidance, glancing blow, these are all good as well, but I'm sure you get the point. You need to layer your defenses. The Forge is the core of Last Epoch, and it's where you craft your gear to be more powerful. From level 10 all the way to level 100, you should absolutely be using the Forge. F is the default keybind to open up the Forge, and each piece of gear has 2 prefixes and 2 suffixes, which can be increased within the Forge. You can add or increase these using affix shards, which can drop from anything in the game. They can also be obtained by destroying the item using a shatter rune or a rune of removal, giving you the shards of the affixes present on that item, depending on the tier. It's important to know that using a shatter rune gives you a random number of affix shards, so if you find a rare affix, like +1 to a skill, you should use a rune of removal instead, which guarantees you get the affix shard you want. But this costs Forge potential. Every affix you add or upgrade costs Forge potential, with the exception of using a Rune of Discovery, which fills all empty slots with random tier 1 affixes at no cost. A random number of Forge potential is used every time you craft until the item reaches 0. When your Forge potential hits 0, there's nothing more you can do to this item. Every piece of gear has a random amount of forging potential. The higher, the better. as it allows you to get more crafts out of the item. And glyphs, such as Glyph of Hope, can be used to save you forge potential because it has a 25% chance to not use any forge potential. There are other glyphs and runes that allow you to do more complex crafting, like turning a normal item into a unique item, and if you hover over them, it will tell you exactly what each of them does, and clicking on the guide button at the top right of the forge menu will also give you some pretty helpful insight on crafting. In Last Epoch, you have some interesting items known as idols. Make sure to do all side quests to unlock all of the idol slots. These idols provide passive bonuses to your character, and on the surface, they seem pretty simple, with stats like resistances, increases to health, or damage increases, but you can find some pretty badass build-defining idols specific to each class. Take for example my Hammer Throw Paladin here. I have 4 idols that all give me a chance to cast Smite whenever my hammer hits an enemy, making for some sick effects of seeing lightning rain down as my hammer spin around smiting everything. But more importantly, it's adding a ton of damage because I specialized into Smite in the skill tree, taking advantage of the Smite procs from the idols. It also makes a cool sound effect when I move them around in my inventory. Hey, if you're enjoying the video, why not click the subscribe button and leave a comment letting me know what other guides you want to see. Now let's get back to the video. As far as gear goes, Last Epoch has common, magic, rare, exalted, unique, set, and the highest, legendary, which we will talk about in a moment. Every affix on an item, which are just the 4 stats it can have, will roll within a tier ranging from 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. And these can be increased through crafting like we explained earlier. The exception is finding an exalted item, which is what you will be hunting for, as these are some of the best items in the game. Exalted items drop with tier 6 and tier 7 affixes and can only be dropped. You cannot craft past tier 5. Pro tip, if you hover over an item and hold Alt on your keyboard, you can see exactly what each stat does. And if you hold Alt and Control at the same time, you will see what tier any given stat is on that item. Now, legendary items is where things get a little nutty. A legendary is just a unique which had additional stats crafted onto it. As you can see here, I have the normal devotion unique amulet on the left, and then I have the legendary version with an extra 49% poison resistance. The red stat was actually taken from another item. Now, I know this sounds confusing, so let me explain. When a unique item drops, it has a chance to drop with legendary potential, which ranges from 1 to 4. This determines how many extra stats it can have. So a unique item with 1 legendary potential can have 1 extra stat. Okay, well, how do we add the extra stat? You have to run a Temporal Sanctum dungeon, which is one of 4 endgame dungeons. If you survive to the end, you can use the Eternity Cache. You then put your unique item with legendary potential in the Eternity Cache alongside an exalted item. Note that they need to be the same type. For example, a unique helmet needs an exalted helmet. When you click Seal Cache, random stats off the exalted item will be added to the unique depending on the number of legendary potential the unique had. This is why any build in Last Epoch is viable with the right amount of investment into your character. A loot filter is actually built into Last Epoch, but as of right now, it's pretty hidden. The only way to find it would be to check your keybinds to see that there is a loot filter. By default, it should be Shift and F at the same time, and you can look through this yourself and be as strict as you want. I usually keep mine pretty simple, especially in the early game. First, I hide all the item types, add a rule to show all exalted, unique, and set items. Then I add a rule to show items with the affixes I want. For example, if I'm going to be doing a melee physical build, I go through and select all the items and affixes that are going to work with that build. One massive tip is if you are looking for specific affix shards, check the emphasize option and select the affixes you want. That way you can just look out for anything that is emphasized when it drops, and you know that if you deconstruct that item through crafting, it will give you the affix shards you need. But honestly, I would not really worry about a loot filter until you reach the end game and the screen is cluttered with items you will never use. In Path of Exile endgame, you have maps. In Diablo 4 endgame, you have nightmare dungeons. And in Last Epoch, the main endgame consists of monoliths, which I'm just going to refer to them as monos for simplicity. These will unlock after you finish the campaign around level 50 to 60. There are a bunch of monos to conquer, and each one has a stability bar at the top. Filling up the bar is done by completing echoes. All these little nodes you see here on the map are echoes, and you're gonna hear me say echo a lot, by the way. Each echo adds stability to the mono when completed. Killing all enemies within an echo gives you the maximum amount of stability for that echo. Unlocking quests along the way. When you finish the final quest on the left, the mono is completed and you get to choose a random blessing. Each mono has a bunch of blessings tied to it, and you can repeat it as much as you want to get the blessing you need. You can go to your inventory and click on the blessings tab on the top left to see a list of all the blessings in each mono that are available. Though most of these will not be visible if you haven't seen it as an option at least once. When you complete the monoliths on normal, you will unlock the level 100 legendary monos. There is also corruption, a mechanic that makes it more difficult but increases the loot you get. You can increase corruption by doing these blue echoes, which will put you in a boss fight. Once completed, the timeline will be reset and the corruption will be added. The level 100 legendary monos have a minimum of 100 corruption, and the blessings are much more powerful. So I recommend just trying to shred through normal until you unlock legendary. Alright, let's quickly summarize some important takeaways from this video. Pick a class you know you will enjoy. It's much more likely you will create an amazing build if it resonates with you and your playstyle. 1 or 2 damage types. It is much easier and your damage will be much higher if you scale cold and lightning as opposed to trying to scale cold, lightning, and physical. Layer your defenses. Remember that max resistances, high health, and health regen is good, but not enough. You need to add extra layers of damage reduction, such as having a ton of endurance and a ton of armor, further reducing all the damage you take. You can't deal damage if you're dead. Craft everything all the time. Aside from the obvious things like +1 to a specific skill or a glyph of despair, which are really rare crafting materials that should be saved for the endgame, you want to be crafting all the time. Use up the forge potential on your gear, exalted gear, and legendaries. Keep your eye out for exalted gear, as these are the best items which cannot be crafted. And uniques with legendary potential, because you can create some pretty insane legendaries that literally help your build break the sound barrier. Endgame blessings. Farm out all those monoliths and get some of those sweet blessings that are straight up extra passive bonuses to your character. That is all the info I have for this Last Epoch beginner guide. If you want me to cover any of these subjects in more detail, I would love to make a video that would help you out so you could make your own awesome builds. Be sure to subscribe to my channel and leave a comment whether you liked the video and this helped you, or even just to tell me how stupid I am and nothing I say makes sense. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to click on my video and watch. I'm Manareth, and I'll be back. Peace.